It was 4:03 p.m. when the man in the ill-fitting tuxedo reached for his jacket and I saw the unmistakable outline of a firearm. No hesitation. No second guessing. I shouted gun just as the first champagne flute shattered. My name is Emily Carson. I'm 29. And yesterday I saved my father's life at his own wedding after he spent the entire weekend introducing me as just a security guard. That was the moment it all changed. Not when I enlisted in the Army. Not when I graduated with a criminal justice degree. Not even when I became a lead threat assessment specialist at one of the most respected private security firms in the country. No, the shift came when I tackled an armed man during the most extravagant wedding Long Beach had ever seen, wearing a navy blue bridesmaid dress and a bullet wound in my shoulder. Until that moment, I'd always been his disappointment, the daughter who turned her back on Ivy League law schools to serve in uniform. But yesterday, in front of 200 horrified guests and one news camera, my training and instincts made the headlines. And for the first time in my life, my father actually looked at me. The morning sun reflected off the Pacific, casting a soft glow across the manicured grounds of Ocean View Gardens Resort. I had hoped a long walk along the shoreline would clear my head, maybe even ease the ache left from the night before my father's fifth introduction of me as just a security guard. I wasn't surprised anymore. Disappointed, yes, but not surprised. By 3:30 p.m., the garden had begun to fill with guests in designer sunglasses and pastel linens. Everything gleamed. Rows of white chairs fanned out before a floral arch, the string quartet gently tuning their instruments beneath a silk-draped gazebo. I found a seat near the back. No one noticed me, and that was exactly how I preferred it after last night's humiliation. Then something odd pulled me from my thoughts. One of the catering staff, at least, he was dressed like one moved differently. His posture was two alert eyes scanning in short bursts like he was looking for targets, not glasses to refill. His uniform hung off him like it had been borrowed, not issued. I watched him speak briefly to another server whose body language mirrored the same stiffness, the same readiness. That was my first red flag. I reminded myself not to jump to conclusions. But when a third man, also in catering attire, circled toward the gift table with a bulky duffel bag under one arm, the pit in my stomach hardened into steel certainty. Something was wrong. I excused myself quietly, slipping away from the ceremony area, moving toward the service wing like I belonged there. Old habits kicked in, blending observing without drawing attention. I passed through a side hallway that led to the resort's staff-only wing, finding a security camera monitor room tucked behind a private, staff-only door. Inside was a single on-duty guard, maybe in his late 50s. Carl, according to his name tag. "I need to speak with your supervisor right now," I said, flashing my ID from Sentinel Security Solutions. Carl raised an eyebrow, clearly thrown off by the wedding guest barging in. But my tone left little room for debate. Within minutes, I was briefing the resort's head of security, Michael Jenkins, on what I'd seen. 3 suspects, I said, pointing at the camera feed. Possibly more. Coordinated movement. They're not part of your contracted catering staff, that's for damn sure. One's carrying a bag that could easily conceal weapons or equipment. Jenkins folded his arms. "We can't interrupt the ceremony on a guess." "They're not guessing," I shot back. "They're staging, timing. The reception is their moment to strike when everyone's distracted and wearing hundreds of thousands in jewelry." He hesitated. "We're short-staffed. I already called local police. They're sending units ETA 20 minutes. You've got 15 to get proactive. I suggest discreet positioning of your team. Cover all exits. Lock down the east gate." That's the direction I overheard them mention. That got his attention. We coordinated quickly, too quickly maybe, but it was the best we had. Jenkins was sharp, but his team wasn't prepared for a full-blown heist. I returned to the ceremony, slipping into the last row just as Eleanor made her way down the aisle, glowing in ivory lace. My father, Michael Carson, stood at the altar, beaming with the pride he never once showed me. As I watched him take Eleanor's hands, I felt that old tug, the ache for recognition. A nod. A moment of acknowledgement. But I didn't come here for that anymore. I came here because I had a job to do, even if no one else knew I was doing it. My eyes swept the perimeter. The 3 men had repositioned, one near the bar, one flanking the gift table, and the third pacing close to the reception tent. All 3 now wore earpieces. That told me 2 things. This was bigger than 3 men, and the robbery was happening sooner than expected. I tapped a quick message to Jenkins, updating their positions, then slowly made my way toward the back of the gathering. I needed to be mobile. As the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, a cheer rose from the crowd, and that's when the lights flickered. A power disruption. Brief, intentional. A signal. The man near the bar reached into his jacket. The glint of metal was unmistakable. Gun, I shouted, my voice cutting through the applause like a blade. Chaos exploded. Guests screamed. Some hit the ground. Others froze. The armed man fired once into the air. This is a robbery. Stay down and stay quiet. 2 more men drew weapons, storming toward the gift table in the VIP section. My father grabbed Eleanor, shielding her behind a floral column. I moved instinctively, diving behind an overturned chair, calculating. 7, maybe 8. 1 shot already fired, and no sign of the police. I caught sight of a terrified elderly woman gasping for air as a gunman barked at her to shut up. Her husband begged for her medication. I'm a medic, I lied, rising slowly, hands visible. Let me help her or you'll have a death on your hands. That turns this into murder. He allowed it, barely. I knelt beside the woman, helping her breathe while keeping an eye on every threat vector in the room. Through the corner of my eye, I saw one of the gunmen demanding my father's watch, his Patek Philippe, and Eleanor's diamond necklace. Then he pressed his gun to my father's temple. Something snapped. I stood. There's a master list of safe codes at the front desk, I said. I work here. I can get it for you. He turned toward me. What do you do here? Security. He approached too close. That was his mistake. In one fluid motion, I twisted the gun from his hand, struck him in the solar plexus, and used his collapsing body as a shield. Another gunman fired. The round tore into my upper arm, hot and immediate, but I didn't stop. Jenkins and 2 officers emerged from cover, guns drawn. Screams, shots, then surrender. Almost. 1 suspect grabbed a server and ran. I chased despite the blood running down my arm. I cornered them at the loading dock. There's no way out, I said. Let her go. I'll shoot. No, you won't. My tone didn't waver. You want daylight again one day? Drop it. He hesitated. That was enough. I disarmed him and secured the hostage before the officers caught up. By the time I returned to the main hall, the robbers were in cuffs. Paramedics were everywhere, and the whispers had begun. Did you see her? She's not just a security guard. She saved us. Then I saw him, my father, staring at me like he'd never really seen me before. Not as a daughter, not as a disappointment, but as the reason he was still alive. The morning after the attempted robbery, I awoke to the sharp pain in my arm and the dull hum of my phone vibrating nonstop on the nightstand. The bandage was stiff. The pain sharper now that the adrenaline had faded. I winced as I reached for my phone. 27 missed calls. Text messages from Alicia, my supervisor at Sentinel Security Solutions. A couple of military buddies I hadn't spoken to in years, and to my surprise, my mom. I saw what happened on the news. Call me the second you're able. I'm proud of you. And worried, please. For a long moment, I just sat there. The resort room was quiet, the ocean visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows. It felt unreal, like waking up after a movie marathon you dreamed into real life. But the pain was real. The bloodstains on my dress from yesterday real. And the fact that guests had nearly been killed in a coordinated armed robbery, very real. I turned on the TV. There I was. On every major local channel, grainy footage from a wedding guest's phone capturing the moment I disarmed the lead suspect. They'd slowed it down, added dramatic music. A lower third banner read, Private Security Professional Thwarts Armed Robbery at High Society Wedding. My full name was there too. And just like that, I became the story. I pulled on the only clean outfit I had. Black pants, a blazer I'd packed in case the rehearsal dinner had been fancier. It barely fit over the bandage, but it would have to do. The brunch, which had been planned as a final send-off for the wedding, was still happening, just relocated to a smaller, quieter room while the original venue remained a crime scene. I wasn't going to go. But the detectives had asked to speak to me again, and frankly, I didn't want my story coming from someone else's mouth. As I stepped into the brunch, conversations faltered. Heads turned. Whispers rippled. The same people who hadn't bothered to look twice at me 2 nights ago were now craning their necks to get a glimpse. I was the one who stopped it. The woman from the news. Eleanor saw me first. She looked different, subdued, humbled. Emily, she said, rushing over. I don't even know where to begin. How's your arm? It'll heal, I replied. I understand the detectives are waiting. Yes, they're in the smaller conference room just down the hall. But before you go, your father's been trying to explain to everyone how proud he is. I blinked. That's new, I said flatly. She gave me a tight smile. It's been a complicated day. Understatement of the year. The detectives were professional, thorough, and respectful. They confirmed that the robbers were part of a known crew responsible for 3 other similar heists. I'd likely be called to testify when the case went to trial. They also mentioned that the department was recommending me for a civilian bravery award. Not necessary, I said quickly. The lead detective shrugged. Maybe not. But you earned it. We've had trained officers freeze in less intense situations. You were surgical. As I returned to the brunch, I hoped to slip out quietly. But my father had other plans. There she is. He called loudly from across the room, drawing every eye. The hero of the hour. I froze. He strode over, champagne in hand, pulling me into a side hug that felt forced and foreign. Everyone wants to hear about what you do, Emily. I've been telling them all about your military service. Your company Sentinel, is it? Didn't they handle security for that gubernatorial gala? I stared at him, stunned. This wasn't pride. It was performance. He was basking in my glow, not because he valued me, but because now publicly I had made him look good. Before I could respond, the TV mounted on the wall behind the bar switched to a new segment. The volume increased. A guest had clearly turned it up on purpose. Breaking news, the anchor announced. We now have exclusive footage from inside the Ocean View Gardens Resort, where a daring armed robbery was foiled by a wedding guest identified as Emily Carson, a senior security operative with Sentinel Security Solutions and former Army threat assessment specialist. The room fell utterly silent. Security camera footage played me disarming the leader, coordinating with venue security, later pursuing the final suspect through the kitchen, freeing a hostage. None of this I knew had been recorded. Holy. Someone muttered nearby. She's on the news. I saw my father's face. His champagne glass slipped from his hand, shattering on the floor. The anchor continued. Authorities estimate the stolen jewelry and cash recovered totaled over $300,000. Carson's actions are being credited with preventing what could have become a mass casualty event. Guests turned to me in waves. You did that? How did you know you took down the guy with the gun? I barely heard them. All I could focus on was my father, still frozen, still staring at me like a stranger he was seeing for the first time. And just like that, the power dynamics of this entire weekend flipped. Where I'd once been the afterthought, I was now the center of gravity. People who'd ignored me yesterday were lining up to shake my hand. Decorated vet, right, one of my father's investment buddies asked. Your firm's reputation is impeccable. Another leaned in. Emily, I'd love to talk to you about reviewing security for our upcoming company retreat. I fielded their questions with polite efficiency, keeping my tone neutral. This wasn't my victory lap. I'd just done my job. Eventually, I excused myself and crossed the room to my father, who still hadn't moved. His voice was hoarse when he finally spoke. That was you, I nodded. He rubbed his face, then shook his head slowly. I didn't know. No, I said. You never asked. There was a long silence. Around us, the buzz continued, but we were in our own little pocket of reality now. He opened his mouth. Closed it again. Then can we talk? Somewhere quiet. I hesitated, then nodded. He led me to a lounge on the top floor, empty, with a view of the ocean. The same view we used to sit in front of when I was a kid. Only back then, he never stayed long. Work always called. I watched all of it, he said. I heard what the officer said. And your boss. You're incredible, Emily. I've been the same person for years, Dad. This isn't new. He winced. I know. That's what's hard. I dismissed it. Dismissed you. Because it wasn't what I imagined for you. Because I couldn't see outside of my own expectations. We sat in silence. I always thought I knew what success meant, he continued. Big offices, big paychecks, prestige. But when that man had a gun to my head yesterday, none of that mattered. Only you did. My throat tightened, but I stayed quiet. I owe you an apology, he said. Not just for yesterday, but for all the times I made you feel small. You deserved better from me. It was a start. A messy, too late, complicated start, but a start nonetheless. I nodded once. Okay, I said quietly. We sat by the large window overlooking the Pacific, the late afternoon sun casting a golden shimmer across the waves. It was quiet in the lounge, just the sound of water wind and the occasional clink of glasses from the bar down the hall. My father sat across from me, hands clasped between his knees, eyes fixed on the horizon like he was waiting for the ocean to offer him answers. "I've been replaying it in my head," he said finally. "The footage. The moment you stepped between that armed man and the elderly couple. The precision. The calm. The courage." I stayed quiet. "And all this time," he continued, "I thought you were wasting your potential." I turned toward him. "Because I wasn't wearing a suit sitting behind a desk." He winced. "I know, I deserve that." "No," I said. "You deserve honesty." He looked at me, really looked. For the first time, there was no dismissal in his eyes. No forced civility. Just the dawning realization that maybe, just maybe, he'd never actually known me at all. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" he asked. "About all the high-profile assignments? About the threat assessments? The training you did after the army?" "I did," I said. "More than once. You never listened. You were too busy reminding me that I could have gone to law school, that I could have joined one of your friends' firms." He leaned back, visibly ashamed. "I thought I was protecting you," he said. "Giving you options." "No," I replied evenly. "You were controlling the narrative. You didn't want me to have options, you wanted me to pick yours." He nodded slowly, the words sinking deep. "I suppose I never gave you the credit you earned." That's the understatement of the year. A soft laugh escaped him, small but real. "I deserve that too." We lapsed into silence again. But it wasn't heavy this time. It was clearing, like air after a thunderstorm. When I was in the army, I said there was this drill we did every quarter. Active shooter response. You're blindfolded, thrown into a dark simulation room with live actors and fake weapons. Sirens, smoke shouting. You don't know who's a threat and who's a victim. He blinked. "Sounds terrifying." It is. The goal isn't to be brave. It's to act, to assess, to protect. That's where I found out what I was good at, not pretending in boardrooms, but standing in the line no one else wanted to. He looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time. "And I tried to talk you out of that." "Yes," I said, repeatedly. "I'm sorry." Those words, simple as they were, hit harder than expected. Not because they erased anything, but because they acknowledged it. And after all these years, acknowledgement felt like oxygen. "There's more," he added. "About your mom." I frowned. "What about her?" She's been telling me for years that I was pushing you away, that I didn't know how to love someone who didn't follow my playbook. But I thought she was just being overprotective. I see now she was being right." I almost smiled. "She showed up to all your award ceremonies," he continued. "She sent me the invites. I ignored every one of them." I stared at him. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I want to be honest. Like you said. For once I want to show up. Not because of the media attention." "No," he said quietly. "Because of what you did before the cameras showed up." We sat in that silence, and for the first time it felt like the walls between us weren't just cracked, they were crumbling. "I don't need you to suddenly be proud." I said, my voice low. "I don't need your approval, but I do need you to understand who I am." "I'm starting to," he admitted. "You're not a security guard." "I am," I said. "And I'm also a threat assessment specialist, a military veteran, a professional. All those things can exist at once." He nodded, absorbing it all. "And for what it's worth," he added, "you're the most capable person I've ever met." That one got me, because he meant it. We sat for another 10 minutes watching the sun dip lower. Eventually, I stood to leave. "I should head out. I have a train." He stood too. "Will you let me visit sometime your place?" I raised an eyebrow. "You mean the one you called a shoebox?" He grimaced. "Deserved again." I paused, then offered a small nod. "We'll see." When I got back to my apartment in Santa Monica, the inbox was overflowing. Dozens of emails, subject lines screaming my name in all caps. Local journalists, national journalists, talk show producers, security blogs, podcasts, even a major morning show wanting a hero segment for next Thursday. The phone didn't stop ringing for days. My boss at Sentinel Security Solutions, Martin Chen, called the moment I walked through the door. "Emily," he said, skipping formalities. "You good?" "Alive, arm-stitched, bruised, ego healing." That's not what I meant. We've all seen the footage. Everyone has. You didn't just defuse a threat, you shut down a multi-person armed robbery with a level of professionalism most SWAT teams dream about. I exhaled. I was just doing my job. Sure, but you did it in a bridesmaid dress on your day off without backup. You know how many clients are calling new contracts? Partnerships. You've made us a national name, Emily. That wasn't the goal. I know. And that's exactly why the CEO wants to meet with you next week. For what? Martin paused. To offer you a new role. Head of Threat Response Training. You'll lead a new division, train the next generation, travel to major clients, shape the standard for our protocols nationwide. I didn't respond immediately. This was big. Not just a promotion, a leap. You're not obligated to say yes, Martin added. But I hope you do. Because what you did out there, that was textbook. And we want to make your instincts the company's blueprint. Can I think about it? Of course, he said. But know this, whatever you decide, we've never been prouder. After we hung up, I just stood there in my tiny kitchen staring at the scar peeking from the bandage on my arm. It was still healing. And so was I. Over the next few weeks, my face kept appearing in places I never expected, on news panels discussing security preparedness, in op-eds about the rise of overlooked professionals, and in LinkedIn shout-outs from people I'd never met. The story had gone viral. Not because I looked like an action hero, but because I didn't. I was real, grounded, human. And apparently that was refreshing. Invitations poured in: industry conferences, women in leadership panels, veterans organizations. I even got a call from the Department of Homeland Security asking if I'd consult on a task force. A month after the wedding, I found myself in a downtown hotel ballroom, standing at a podium with National Security Summit printed in gold across the banner behind me. The room was packed: corporate execs, law enforcement, private contractors. People who 5 weeks earlier wouldn't have looked twice at me. Now they leaned in. I didn't stop that robbery because I wanted to be famous, I told them. I did it because it was the right thing to do. Because people were in danger. Because I had training and instincts and the ability to act, and when you're in that position, you don't freeze. You engage. I paused, then added, but here's the part people miss. I wasn't just trained to act. I was trusted. Trusted by mentors, by commanders, by colleagues who didn't care what gender I was or what suit I wore, but who saw my skills for what they were. That trust empowered me. And that's the kind of culture we need in every security room, every boardroom, every damn place where leadership matters. The room stood, applauded, and for a moment I let it in. Not the fame, not the attention, but the validation that my work, my life meant something bigger. Still, I kept boundaries. I declined most interviews, turned down the book deals and tell-all requests. I wasn't interested in being anyone's poster child. I didn't want to become a symbol. I wanted to keep doing the work quietly, effectively, without pretense. Back at Sentinel, I accepted the new role, but with conditions. I wanted full autonomy over training design, the ability to recruit underrepresented vets and overlooked talent, and a budget for community outreach. Martin didn't even hesitate. Done. We launched the division in April. I called it Tier 1 Response. Within weeks, we had our first contracts: 3 major airports, 2 celebrity estates, and a tech summit in San Francisco. I led each kickoff briefing myself. And when I walked into those rooms, people listened. Not because of the news story, but because word had spread I didn't talk theory. I talked reality, lived experience, tactical insight born of chaos. Meanwhile, my father's world shifted in quieter but meaningful ways. He started calling casually at first, then more consistently. At one point, he asked if I'd review the security protocols for one of his firm's annual retreats. Not because he doubted his team, but because he trusted mine. When a profile about me ran in a major security publication, he framed it, put it on the wall next to his industry plaques, said it made his office finally balanced. And in June, for the first time in my adult life, he came to my home, sat on my IKEA couch, ate my overcooked pasta, admired the frame team photo I kept from my Army unit. You know, he said, scanning the room, I used to think success looked like corner offices and waterfront property. I raised an eyebrow. But now, he continued, I think it looks more like this: purpose, integrity, and enough space to sleep without regret. I laughed. Are you quoting a podcast? Maybe he grinned. And just like that, we were learning how to be family again. Not because we fixed everything, but because finally we both knew how to listen. Healing didn't come all at once. The headlines faded within a few weeks. The media, as always, moved on new scandals, fresh tragedies, viral distractions. And I was grateful. I didn't want to be a permanent headline. But what lingered wasn't external. It was the internal shift, the quiet reckoning that happens after the noise dies down. The day I sat across from my therapist, I finally said it aloud. I spent most of my adult life trying to prove something to my father. Dr. Garcia nodded gently. And now, I'm done proving. I just want to live as me. Define me, she prompted. That question, deceptively simple, sat with me for days. Who was I really when I wasn't performing? When I wasn't trying to earn validation? I started journaling again, something I hadn't done since basic training. In those pages, I wrote about the girl who enlisted at 17 because she craved structure, the soldier who discovered her ability to stay calm under pressure, the woman who realized protection wasn't just physical, it was emotional, psychological, environmental. I wrote about how I'd become good at shielding others, but terrible at protecting my own heart. And I began to understand something that felt both liberating and painful. I had let my father's dismissal shape my ambition more than I ever admitted. I didn't become a threat response specialist to impress him, but I also didn't fully embrace my success because a part of me still believed it wasn't enough by his standards. Until now. The hostage situation at the wedding hadn't changed who I was. It had simply stripped away the excuses. In that moment, I'd acted instinctively without waiting for permission or approval. And that version of me, the one kneeling beside an elderly woman while watching 3 armed suspects, was the most real version I'd ever known. I began setting boundaries. I stopped over-explaining my career to people who only understood prestige and dollar signs. I started saying no to networking events that felt performative, and I gave myself permission to enjoy the quiet satisfaction of doing meaningful work without applause. With my father, things grew steady. Not perfect, but honest. He no longer tried to rewrite our history, and I stopped trying to force a closeness that wasn't there. Instead, we built something new, grounded in mutual respect rather than performance. He'd text me when he saw a news piece about cybersecurity breaches asking my thoughts. I'd reply with short, informative messages not to educate him, but to include him. When I spoke at a conference in San Diego, he drove down just to sit in the back row. Said nothing afterward. Just hugged me like it meant something. That was enough. One afternoon, while reorganizing old files, I found an envelope I'd never opened. It was from 3 years ago, an invitation to an award ceremony I'd won for tactical planning. My mom had mailed it, adding a sticky note in her cursive handwriting. I'm proud of you, sweetheart. Wish he could see it too. I cried when I read it. Not because he hadn't shown up, but because I had kept the envelope unopened, like even then I didn't believe I deserved to celebrate alone. That's when I realized something profound. External recognition had never been the issue. It was internal permission I'd lacked all along. So I gave it to myself. I redecorated my home office, not with medals or media clippings, but with reminders of what I valued. A framed photo of my old Army unit. A note from a teen mentee I'd once helped redirect from gang life into trade school. A map with push pins showing the cities where I'd led trainings, proof not of prestige, but of reach. I even adopted a dog, a rescue mutt with one ear and a cautious heart I named Tango. We'd go on early morning runs, him sniffing every tree like it held secret knowledge, me relearning what it meant to breathe freely. And perhaps the biggest sign of growth, I stopped trying to win conversations with my father. There was no need. When he called one evening, frustrated about a financial article misrepresenting security protocols, I listened. Just listened. And when he finished, I said, "That's how it feels when people oversimplify my work, too." He paused. I never considered that he admitted. "That's okay," I said. "You are now." We still had rough edges, still disagreed on plenty. But we weren't enemies anymore. We were 2 people learning how to see each other clearly, maybe for the first time. And that clarity, that growth, it didn't come from saving a room full of people. It came from saving myself from the narrative I'd been trapped in for far too long. 1 year later, I stood behind a podium again, but this time not in combat boots or a blazer hiding a bandaged arm. Tonight, I wore a midnight blue jumpsuit, tailored, confident, and unapologetically mine. The room was packed dignitaries, executives, first responders, veterans, and donors. This wasn't just another conference. It was a charity gala organized by none other than Eleanor and my father, benefiting emergency response training programs for underserved communities. I'd hesitated when they asked me to speak, not because I didn't believe in the cause, but because I no longer felt the need to tell my story on command. But this felt different. This time I wasn't speaking to justify who I was. I was speaking because people in that room had the power to equip the next young woman like me, the one no one took seriously until the worst day proved her right. So I stepped up, took a breath, and spoke from the place I'd spent a year learning to trust. Security I began isn't just about preventing harm. It's about creating space for safety, for dignity, for belonging. I paused, scanning the crowd. For years, I believed my job was only to keep people physically safe, to assess threats, to neutralize danger. And that's true. But it's not the whole story. I looked down at my prepared remarks, then folded the paper and set it aside. I want to tell you something I've learned not just through training or crisis response, but through living. True safety isn't just the absence of danger. It's the presence of respect, of visibility, of knowing you are valued, not in spite of who you are, but because of it. The room quieted. Not because I demanded silence, but because every ear leaned forward. A year ago, I was introduced at a wedding as just a security guard. Today, that same man calls me his daughter and watches proudly from the third row. A murmur of warm laughter. I caught my father's gaze. He smiled, not performative, not panicked, just present. But here's the truth, I continued. What changed that day wasn't who I was. It was who he finally saw. And that's the opportunity each of us carries to see what's always been there in someone else before the crisis forces it. I closed with this. If you want to build a safer world, start by honoring the strength sitting silently in the back of the room. Start by listening to the voices we often overlook. And above all, start by remembering that courage isn't loud. Sometimes it wears a navy blue dress and keeps everyone alive. Applause rose, not thunderous, but sustained. Not performative, but real. And I let myself feel it. Not as proof, not as redemption, but as alignment. A full circle moment that didn't erase the past, it made peace with it. After the speech guests approached, some wanted photos. Some wanted to talk about their daughters, their fears, their work. I listened, answered, hugged, laughed. I wasn't hiding anymore. Eleanor gave me a glass of sparkling water and squeezed my hand. You were magnificent. Thanks, I said. And thank you for not making this about him. She smiled. He's learning, but tonight's yours. My father joined us later, looking slightly awkward in his tux. You were incredible, he said. You didn't have to mention me. I did, I replied. Because growth isn't just mine. It's yours too. He blinked. I'm proud of you, Emily, and I'm grateful. I nodded. That was enough. As I walked to the valet later that night, I felt Tango's collar in my purse. He was at home, probably curled up on the couch waiting for our midnight walk. And I smiled, because this was my life now. Whole, not polished, not perfect, but mine. And after years of shadowboxing with approval, I had stepped fully into the light, not because someone granted me permission, but because I finally claimed it for myself. For much of my life, I believed value had to be proven measured in degrees, job titles, or the nods of those in power. I spent years chasing acknowledgement from someone who refused to see my worth unless it aligned with his expectations. But that mindset was never about my job or his standards. It was about my own permission to be proud without external validation. The lesson. You don't need a crisis to justify your existence. You don't need a moment of heroism to be worthy of respect. Who you are when no one's watching is already enough. Your journey, even if unseen, matters. And the people who deserve a place in your life are the ones who recognize your worth without headlines or applause. Growth isn't about changing yourself to fit someone else's mold. It's about standing firm in who you are, even if it means standing alone. Because sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is live your truth unshaken and unapologetically. Maybe you felt overlooked. Maybe someone in your life reduced your identity to a job title or a single decision. Maybe you've spent years trying to earn their approval. If so, let this be your reminder your value isn't up for debate. You don't need to wait for a headline moment to claim your worth. You can start now by honoring your path no matter how unconventional. By building a life that reflects your values. And by drawing boundaries with those who only show up when the spotlight does. Ask yourself, am I living to be seen or living to be whole? The most powerful transformation often begins when you stop proving and start believing.